For more chat about geek entertainment, answers to your questions, and news from the wider world of Christian geekery, get the Christian Geek Central podcast today on iTunes and other podcast services. Well, my editing skills are crap, but can the same thing be said about chaos walking? Stick around and find out. Can you read my mind? Can you picture the things I'm thinking of? Bum, 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 wondering why you are all the wonderful things you are. You can fly. Okay. Hey, I'm Peter Francis from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Play Productions. This is my uncut review of Chaos Walking. The synopsis on IMDb reads, in the not-too-distant future... It really does start like that. Todd Hewitt, played by Tom Holland, discovers Viola, Daisy Ridley, a mysterious girl who crash lands on his planet, where all the women have disappeared and the men are afflicted by the noise, a force that puts all their thoughts on display. In this dangerous landscape, Viola's life is threatened, and as Todd vows to protect her, he will have to discover his own inner power and unlock the planet's dark secrets. I don't know if that's true. He unlocks some secrets of some people, but I don't know that the planet really has dark secrets he needs to unlock. And that whole line about his inner power, I don't know if it's really an inner power so much. It's an inner power maybe in the sense of like, you gotta believe in yourself and summon up all your will or something. I don't know. It's unusual wording here. From the director of The Bourne, Identity, and Edge of Tomorrow, and based on the best-selling novel, The Knife of Never Letting Go. Anyway, what is this animal? Well, it's a sci-fi drama with suspense peppered throughout. It really depends heavily on the novelty of the noise. I don't want to say it's concept. It's like high concept sci-fi or concept-driven sci-fi, because that might evoke it being this really intellectual, kind of dry affair. And the characters are emotional, and you are meant to care about them and the suspense, the suspenseful circumstances that are affecting them. But really, I do think that if you were to take the concept of the noise and the whole thoughts on display, because basically all the men on this planet, something about the planet causes them, which is never explained, causes them to project holographic images that flash in and out of appearance that are representing their thoughts, as well as sounds that always come along with it. In fact, you get the sounds more often than you get holographic images, you know. So it's this weird idea. But, you know, whatever, at some point you just accept, okay, it's something weird about this alien planet, we don't know why, but whatever, it's sci-fi, you know. It's mainly just like this thing that it gives them an excuse to play with this idea that they want to play with. There are some neat applications for this concept, specifically for those who have learned to better control this noise and conjure things with it, so that they can actually use their mental focus to create visual representations that look realistic to other people, whereas most of the time it has this wispy, prismy, rainbow kind of fluctuating colors effect smoking around it all the time. But some people who really learn to focus can temporarily create visuals that appear to be completely real, you know, and so that plays into the story now and then as well. Despite the fact that this movie takes us constantly into the minds of many of its characters, it really only takes us into their surface level thoughts, those scattered in the moment thoughts that people have. It doesn't take us into them as characters, like in the sense that another book would maybe develop a character, give you a layered sense of their motives and why they are the way they are. So I mean, even though it takes us inside the characters very much, ironically, I did not feel like I really knew these characters, or that the characters were fleshed out in a way that I really wanted them to be, so I could really care about what was going on. Instead, I'm just getting introduced constantly to their surfacey, instantaneous thoughts, the random thoughts that pop into their heads that you can't control, things like that, you know, we all have to some degree. The villain, I also felt, played by Mads Mikkelsen, it's not very strong. He is threatening, but he's threatening in this movie because of what we gradually learn about things he's done in the past, not because he's frightening in the present. For me, what makes a villain really effective is if you get an example of how dangerous they are early on in the movie. And then you're thinking, oh my gosh, I hope that doesn't happen to somebody else or some character that we care about. And we really never got that. We just got kind of a... You kind of suspect from the beginning that maybe something's up with this guy, but eventually when you do kind of learn what's going on with him, it's... It didn't leave an impact with me. It didn't make him seem like, oh my gosh, this is a bad guy or this is a dangerous guy, it checked the boxes in terms of what he did. Okay, yes, that's a very dangerous person who would do that kind of thing. But I didn't feel that as a viewer because they didn't take me into those moments of him being dangerous in the way that I think I would really need to feel what I wanted to feel. I also felt about 10 seconds ahead of all the pivotal turns that the plot took in this movie. Just like, it's not that I knew where the whole movie was going and I could call out the end from the beginning, but it was like, okay, 10 seconds from now, oh, this is what's going on. This is what's going on. And not in that suspenseful way, like, oh my gosh, I think this is what's going to happen. I think this is what's going to... Oh, yes, it did happen. I mean, there's a way that you can see what's coming where it's suspenseful, and that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, like, they think I'm going to be surprised by this in 10 seconds, and I'm not, And so that was a little bit of a bummer. But, I mean, your mileage is going to vary. I think a lot of people maybe won't find those turns predictable. The concept of the noise, for my taste, is not detailed enough. We've seen movies like What Women Want, and The Invention of Lying, where this idea of people's thoughts coming out unfiltered and being exposed has been explored, usually in comedy. This might be the first one I've seen where it's explored in a movie that is largely trying to be taken seriously. They still certainly play the idea for comedy, but for a movie that wants to treat the topic and seriously and have largely a serious tone, I guess I wanted a more psychologically realistic take on it, or I wanted to understand the concept of the noise. For example, the nature of our thoughts as they flit in and out of our heads is that they pop in and out faster than words could express them. And so when these thoughts are coming out, we're hearing them basically as spoken dialogue from the actor, that the character's thoughts are coming out of. They're coming out at the same speed that you would talk. And there is definitely a sense where they portray this kind of random popping from one seemingly unconnected thought to another. Every once in a while, just some weird thing will pop in there, and then the rest will follow on a normal track. So they do represent, I think, our thought patterns in some ways that are realistic, but I think, again, for a movie that's going for seriousness as much as this is, I wanted a concept as much as this is, I wanted to, lean into the cerebral nature of this thing. If you're going to, go in a somewhat cerebral nature of sci-fi, then go all the way, and just have me kind of wondering, have me trying to keep up with the concept, rather than feeling like, I understand its limitations, and yet I don't understand why it's limited in the way that it is. So I don't know. I'm not really expressing myself very well, but that's what you get with Uncut reviews from me. The thoughts that popped out also seem to be selective, and so anyway, I guess I just wanted something that was a little bit more detailed and rules. I guess I want rules to help me determine, okay, how does someone, they talked a little bit about how someone could mask their noise, mask their thoughts from coming out, and there's little tricks that people will use to kind of do that, but beyond that there weren't any other rules to say, okay, what kinds of thoughts are going to be turned into projections. They suggested a little bit in an opening text thing on a black screen that talks about unfiltered thoughts, and I was like, okay, what does it mean to filter your thoughts? So I just wanted to understand the rules, I guess, a little bit more. Maybe that would have helped me feel the tension a little bit when someone's trying to hide a thought. I understand what they're up against if I understand the rules of how the concept works. But I think a lot of people aren't going to care about that stuff. So you can take that with a grain of salt if what I'm saying isn't very persuasive to you. There is an alien race that figures significantly into the story, but is seems to be forgotten about after the first hour. And I understand why they diverted attention away from them after that first hour, but still, I was like, we're not going to bring them back into the story. We're not going to, like, they're not going to play a more significant role. We're just going to, like, oh, there they were, and now they're gone, and they're not really relevant to the story anymore. It just seemed like an odd choice. I would almost wonder, is this book part of a series or something, and maybe more stories will take place on this planet and the aliens will come back into the story and be more relevant in the sequel? I don't know. It was just a little bit odd. In general, the way I felt watching this movie is that things kept happening, plot kept progressing, but I just didn't care. I don't think that's necessarily because of the performances. The cast was all fine, but it's not a movie that's really driven by performances. It doesn't seem to be written or shot in a way that they're kind of leaning on performances in this movie. As far as the stunts and visuals go, there's almost continuous visual effects throughout this movie representing the noise, the thoughts of men specifically. There is some CG alien stuff, but it's, CG alien stuff. There was one moment that just, randomly, and I don't think it was intended to be this standout moment, but there was a moment with a horse that does some swimming in some rapids, and it appears to not be in control of itself and kind of floundering with a rider on top of it. And I was like, I don't think that was CG. It was very brief, but I was like, I think that was a real horse, and it just made me wonder, wow, how did they do that without the horse getting hurt and stuff? So either that was a great CG moment or a great stunt moment. But it wasn't played up at all. It was very like, there it is, there it goes, Anyway, as far as themes, is there anything of moral, philosophical, or spiritual significance going on in the themes of this thing that might trigger some worthwhile thought or conversation? Maybe. I mean, for me, one thing that stood out, and this won't stand out to most people, maybe to some Christians it'll stand out, but there are some references to church in the early story. There's a preacher character that is clearly this bad, antagonistic, judgmental, evil kind of character, and there's a statement being made at one point by the main character at the beginning, just like, I don't know why this preacher's around. Nobody goes to church anymore and stuff like that. And so it seemed like they were going to maybe play with a theme of religion in some way, but they didn't in a very extensive way. It really just seems centered around this one character. It makes me wonder, actually, if that character and the themes of religion were explored more in the book version of this. To contrast with this evil preacher, we do run into a village that, if I didn't misunderstand, it was just a very briefly spoken thing. It's a church settlement, specifically a church settlement. And when you first see this village, the first thing you see is what looks like a church. And then in a little bit of dialogue later on, a woman, if I didn't misunderstand her words, said, we're a church settlement. But she said it very briefly. We're a church settlement, da 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 blah 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 blah. So, but at least there was some representative of some form of presumably Christianity. I mean, you don't hear the word preacher used in like Muslim religion, the Muslim religion, or Hinduism or Buddhism or anything else that I can really think of aside from Christianity. So I mean, it does seem to have references, ties in some way to Christianity, and I was glad that if they're going to do this, the usual eye-rolling, overbearing, evil, judgmental preacher, that they would at least have some other folks that in some way link themselves to Christianity and certainly seem to be much more sympathetic. But I do think it's maybe noteworthy that the preacher was the one that certainly seemed most dedicated to his faith. His motives were connected to his faith, whereas the village, it seemed like kind of a brief thought in passing that they happen to be part of a church settlement. And so I think that what I see a lot in fiction is the more serious someone is about their Christian faith, whatever form that faith takes, usually the more evil they are. There's exceptions to that rule, but that just seems to be what I see. I won't spoil what goes on with the preacher character, but I will say that the evil preacher that they present here has what I think is a believable motive, like the fact that why he's judgmental, why he is the way he is, apart from his zeal, actually. We find out that there's something else going on with him that explains why he's so zealous in his persecution of others and his judgment of others. And I think actually that motive makes sense. So I'm not going to spoil it, but if you know of, a sort of legalistic, judgmental sort of Christian, or a non-Christian for that matter, watching this movie might make you stop and say, I wonder if this person has something parallel in their past that this preacher has in his past, maybe not as extreme, but something maybe that might explain why they are the way they are. So anyway, but I've spent so much time talking about that, and that's really not the thing that stood out to me. It really seemed that the theme is connected to the gimmick of men's thoughts being on display. It reverses, the movie seems to want to play around with reversing the stereotypical male-female tendencies where men in this movie, as opposed to women, which would be the stereotype, men have their heart on their sleeves. Constantly their emotions, their thoughts are on display. They're just putting it all out on the table. And it's the women that are kind of the ciphers, that are the silent ones, the unexpressive mysteries that no one knows, what they're thinking. And I was reminded watching this movie of just, kind of how vulnerable I feel when, say, my wife notices and reacts to some inner flaw of mine that comes out inadvertently. And that feeling of being exposed, even as gracious and forgiving and patient as my wife is, that feeling of being exposed and like, oh, crap, I'm the villain today. I'm the villain in her story or in someone else's story, And, that's something that this movie misses, is like all the vulnerabilities on the display. But I think it's missing what we need in Jesus to remind us that, yes, we are a mess. We are a mess, and we try to hide it, and we'd much rather it be concealed. But if people could see our hearts, they would be appalled at what really goes on inside, especially when we properly compare ourselves to Jesus instead of just to the convenient comparisons with others that we selectively choose to make in our minds. So I think that there's probably a springboard for conversation about just kind of the thoughts that go on in our minds that we would wish other people wouldn't share, and maybe what those kinds of thoughts would reveal about our true inner character and the flaws and the problems that we have. It does steer clear of exposing any flaws in its female characters, but the male characters just can't help but be exposed in this movie, which in turn I think can be a springboard for us to acknowledge the thoughts and feelings we harbor and the complexity of those thoughts. Anyway, I have no idea what your tastes are in movies, but if I were a time traveler, I'd go back in time and say, Peter, oh man, skip this one. The concept just isn't that interesting to you, and your enjoyment is really going to depend on it being interesting. So just don't waste your money. It's definitely not worth going to the theater for both the financial investment and the fact that you're going to have to wear a mask the whole time. You don't want to be there. You don't want to be there. You'll know 30 minutes into this movie, like, this probably isn't a movie for you. It's rated PG-13 for violence and language. Right now I'd like to take some time to write a tune for pre-made rhyme. The lyrics kind of it's getting sad now. The lyrics kind of never change, but the melody gets rearranged. I never know what I'll create to say how much I appreciate Gabriel Stinson, Brian Franklin, Olin D. Branham, the Cellcast, Drew Robb, Winston Crutchfield, Libre, J.D. Myers, and Matthew Ridgway. Thank you for supporting me and SBP and CGC, and now to all who hear this tune, thank you as well. Please come back soon. Want to hear your name in song? Check out our page on Patreon. Yeah, we're not going to resolve it. Going to end feeling unresolved because sadness in life sometimes is unresolved. All right, those are my thoughts. I'd love to get yours in the comments below. Please like, share, subscribe, click that bell to stay connected. I want to thank the Spirit Blade Insiders for making this review possible. You can get the info about the benefits of joining over at patreon.com/Spirit Productions. Then I hope you'll join us soon over at christiangeekcentral.com as we continue to geek out and seek the truth. The Christian Geek Central podcast is the longest-running podcast for Christian geeks with over 600 weekly episodes and counting, featuring audio versions of much of the same content you'll find here, plus exclusive content including weekly news updates from the creators of Christian comics, novels, and video games, debriefing and commentary about what I've been playing, reading, and watching, and my expanded responses to your comments and questions via YouTube, email, or the Christian Geek Central forums. And now, with timestamps, so you can jump straight to the segments you want to hear most. Get the Christian Geek Central podcast today on iTunes and other podcast services, and enjoy one more way you can geek out and seek the truth.